Dawn in Tennessee, April 2011. The kind of morning where dew clings to the grass like glass beads and the woods hum with cicadas waking from their sleep. A young nursing student, books waiting in her car, steps into the driveway of her family home. Nothing about it feels like history in the making. It's just another day in a quiet town. But history doesn't announce itself. It steals. Within minutes, the driveway is stained, the woods swallow a figure in pink, and silence becomes a weapon. What begins as an ordinary morning unravels into one of the most sprawling investigations the state has ever seen. Neighbors whisper, families lock their doors, and across Tennessee, one name becomes a wound: Holly Bobo. Her story is not only about a disappearance. It's about what happens when the ordinary world fractures and daylight itself turns dangerous. At 7:45 on a quiet April morning in 2011, the Bobo family's world cracked apart in the space of a single muffled scream. It wasn't an echo from a nightmare. It wasn't a startled bird call from the woods. It was Holly. A neighbor swore he heard her voice. Panicked, clipped, cut short, rising from the direction of her carport. Moments later, her brother Clint peered through the blinds and saw Holly in her pink top, walking into the tree line with a man dressed head to toe in camouflage. He thought it was her boyfriend. He thought she was safe. He thought wrong. By the time the family realized the mistake, Holly was gone. The kind of gone that turns the air thick, the kind of gone that eats hours into days. What was left in the driveway, a small pool of blood, the metallic tang settling into the Tennessee soil. Not enough for a killing, investigators said. Just enough to make the mind spiral. Enough to make you wonder, was it spilled in panic, in struggle, or was it a deliberate calling card? A breadcrumb dropped by someone who knew this small town would panic at the sight of crimson on pale gravel? The chilling part wasn't just a disappearance. It was how ordinary it all looked at first. A weekday morning, a nursing student with exams on her mind, a family's routine broken by a single noise. Imagine brushing your teeth while, 20 feet away, your sibling is being led into the woods like some grim reenactment of a fairy tale gone rotten. Little Red Riding Hood. But the wolf doesn't wear fur. He wears hunting gear, blending seamlessly into a Tennessee spring. And in that moment, silence became the loudest thing in Parsons. The silence of the trees swallowing them whole. The silence of Clint waiting just a few minutes too long to call. The silence of a family home that would never sound the same again. Holly Bobo didn't just vanish. She was absorbed, like the earth itself had conspired to keep her secret. The question that's haunted Tennessee ever since: who took Holly into those woods and why? Parsons, Tennessee, isn't the kind of place that makes headlines. It's the kind of place where life trickles by in the rhythms of church bells, high school football, and Friday night catfish fries. Tucked inside Decatur County, the town barely scrapes past 3,000 people. More names on a family reunion roster than on the census. Everyone knows everyone, or at least knows of them, which means when something goes wrong, it doesn't feel like news. It feels like betrayal. April 13th, 2011 was supposed to be unremarkable. The state was shaking off winter's residue, replacing brown fields with a green blush of spring. Finals loomed for students. Farmers prepared their land. Hunting season gave men in camouflage a reason to disappear into the woods without raising a single eyebrow. In that sense, it was the perfect camouflage. Normalcy. Normal days hide horrors best. You need to understand the backdrop. Parsons isn't Nashville's neon carnival or Memphis blues soak sprawl. It's the quiet, in-between America where trust is the currency and suspicion is expensive. Doors are left unlocked. Truck engines idle, while their owners grab a biscuit from the diner. A young woman walking into the woods with a man doesn't trigger alarms because half the county looks like that on any given morning. dads, brothers, boyfriends in real tree camo, leading women toward turkey blinds and fishing spots. That's why Holly's story bites deeper than just a crime report. It was an invasion of a bubble, a violation of the unspoken pact that small towns make with their residents. Nothing bad happens here. At least, nothing that bad. People gossip about family feuds, not about disappearances. Blood on gravel wasn't supposed to stain Parsons. But beneath that placid surface, there's another truth. Small towns aren't innocent. They're just quieter. Secrets rot in the stillness. Long grudges fester without the distraction of city chaos. It only takes one predator to remind everyone that the woods aren't just for hunting deer. They're for hiding bodies too. So when Holly Bobo vanished, it wasn't just her family who lost her. The entire county felt something slip out of their grasp. A kind of collective safety net snapped, and every whisper in the diner became a theory. Every pair of camouflage pants in town suddenly looked like a disguise. And the most unnerving part? This wasn't the city. There were no anonymous shadows to point at, no faceless crowds. Whoever walked Holly into those woods almost certainly grew up breathing the same humid Tennessee air, shopping at the same Piggly Wiggly, nodding politely in the same pews. The monster wasn't an outsider. He was homegrown. Holly Lynn Bobo, 20 years old, a nursing student with a voice like sunlight, sweet, easy, impossible to imagine raised in anger. She grew up in Parsons like a flower carefully tended by her family. Her father Dana, her mother Karen, her brother Clint, a family stitched together by Sunday services, hunting trips, and the kind of tight bond that small-town life insists on. She wasn't some shadowy figure we have to piece together from fragments. Everyone knew Holly. She sang in the church choir, her voice lifting in harmonies that made old folks dab their eyes and teenagers roll theirs. She was the kind of student who scribbled notes with precision, the kind who didn't just dream of becoming a nurse. She worked toward it with a clarity most 20-year-olds lack. Helping others wasn't just a career choice. It was her blueprint. And then there was her relationship with Drew Scott, her longtime boyfriend. In a town like Parsons, where everyone keeps score of who's with who, theirs was a storybook romance. Hunting trips, family dinners, shared plans that stretched out into futures they hadn't yet reached. When Holly disappeared, Drew became both a symbol of grief and a target of suspicion. Because in mysteries like this, love stories often curdle into motives. But Holly herself, she wasn't just a victim, not just a pretty face frozen on a missing poster. She was human in a way that aches to talk about. She worried about exams. She posted on Facebook. She texted friends about plans. She teased her brother. She hugged her parents goodnight. All those little details that made a life so painfully ordinary until, suddenly, that life is cut off and the ordinariness feels sacred. What makes this case unbearable is how violently it contrasts with who she was. Holly wasn't reckless. She wasn't wandering strange roads at midnight. She was home. She was safe. And yet she wasn't. Her disappearance didn't just shatter her family. It shattered the logic of small-town existence. If Holly could vanish, anyone could. Her name became a chant in Tennessee. Volunteers shouted it across fields as they searched. Reporters repeated it on every broadcast. It morphed from a person into a symbol, and symbols are dangerous things. They attract not only sympathy but also obsession, suspicion, and exploitation. Holly Bobo became the canvas for everyone's theories, everyone's darkness. But before she was a headline, before she was a case, Holly was just Holly. Pink shirt, shy smile, and a life that should have gone on without ever touching national news. And that's what makes the story cruel. The sheer normalcy of what was lost. It began in the blur of an ordinary morning. April 13th, 2011. Holly was up early, reviewing for an exam, moving to the quiet kitchen like she had 1,000 times before. Her mother had already left for work at the elementary school. Her father was gone on a job, and her brother Clint was still inside the house, half awake, sipping on routine. Then that sound, a scream short and sharp, like air torn apart. A neighbor later testified he heard it, muffled but distinct, coming from the Bobo property. To him it was alarming. To Clint, still inside the house, it seemed less threatening. He thought it was just Holly and her boyfriend arguing outside. Ordinary, manageable. He didn't rush out. He didn't intervene. And in those crucial minutes, the narrative rewrote itself. When Clint finally looked out the window, he saw Holly walking into the woods behind the house, a man by her side, not dragging her, not chasing her, walking. And the man was in camouflage, head to toe. In Parsons, that's not strange. Men wear camo like a second skin. Hunters, farmers, half the county had closets full of it. And Clint, looking out from the blinds, assumed the man was Holly's boyfriend, Drew. No alarm bells, no panic, just a sister heading into the tree line with someone familiar. But there was one detail that wouldn't leave him: the blood. Near Holly's car, by the carport, a small pool of red smeared into the gravel. When her mother Karen returned home and saw it, she didn't hesitate. She called 911. Whatever Clint thought he saw, whatever explanation seemed plausible before, evaporated. Holly hadn't walked willingly into those woods. She'd been taken. That blood stain became the opening chapter of a nightmare that still hasn't faded. It wasn't enough to declare the worst had already happened, but it was enough to remind everyone that violence had erupted here, in the middle of a weekday morning in broad daylight. And here's the cruelest detail. If Clint had stepped outside, if he'd shouted Holly's name, if he'd even opened the door a little sooner, maybe she'd still be alive. That's the poison of hindsight, though. It eats you alive with its maybes. What he saw, what he didn't see, what he mistook. It all became the most dissected 5 minutes in Parsons' history. From that moment forward, the woods weren't just woods anymore. They were a portal. Holly walked in. She never walked out. Searchers fanned out within hours. ATVs growled down dirt roads. Volunteers trampled through briars, rattlesnakes, and creek beds, calling her name. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation descended on Parsons like storm clouds, their presence both reassuring and suffocating. Everyone wanted answers. No one had them. And almost immediately, the contradictions started piling up. Neighbors said they heard screams. Clint swore he saw Holly walk into the woods calmly. The blood by her car. Too much for a nosebleed, too little for fatality. Some investigators whisper it was staged, like the scene was arranged to mislead. Others insisted it was a sign of a struggle. Nothing fit cleanly. Meanwhile, rumors metastasized like mold in a damp house. Parsons is small enough that gossip travels faster than official reports. Some people insisted Holly had been stalked. Others believed she'd been tricked into leaving by someone she knew. And then came the darker theories, that maybe it wasn't a stranger at all. Maybe someone inside her orbit, someone she trusted, had orchestrated it. Because who else could get close enough without raising alarms? And then there was Drew, the boyfriend. His alibi was airtight, investigators said. He'd been nowhere near the house. But still, suspicion clung to him, because stories like this always point fingers at the closest man first. Meanwhile, Clint became an unwilling centerpiece of speculation. Why hadn't he acted? Why hadn't he stopped her? Was his mistake actually something more sinister? Every version of events grew cracks. If Holly was being led away against her will, why didn't she scream again? If she was calm, was she coerced? Threatened? Or was she drugged? Her compliance unnatural? The woods themselves seemed to taunt the searchers. Trails ended abruptly. Dogs lost a scent. It was as if she'd been plucked from the earth. And yet, every so often, new fragments surfaced, a scrap of fabric, an impression in the dirt, whispers of sightings miles away. Each clue lit hope for a second before collapsing under scrutiny. The longer she was gone, the more the case shifted from rescue to riddle. Parsons was unraveling. Strangers were interrogated. Neighbors side-eyed each other in grocery aisles. Church congregations whispered prayers while secretly calculating who among them could wear camouflage and lure a young woman away. Something was off. Everyone could feel it, but the details refused to align. And that's when the true horror settled in. The realization that Holly hadn't just been taken. She'd been swallowed by a plan, a scheme so precise that daylight, family, and neighbors hadn't been enough to stop it. The investigation into Holly Bobo's disappearance quickly swelled into one of the largest in Tennessee history. Helicopters thumped over the tree canopy, while boots, state, federal, and volunteer, pounded through swamps and pine thickets. For weeks, every drainage ditch and hunting cabin was treated like a potential crime scene. But size doesn't guarantee clarity. In fact, the investigation became a hall of mirrors. Authorities first cast a wide net, chasing tips that flicker like fireflies, bright for a moment, then vanishing. A truck spotted near the Bobo home. A suspicious man at a gas station. A possible sighting in a county 2 hours away. Each one sent waves of hope through Parsons, only to sink into disappointment when debunked. And then came the suspects. Not official at first, just whispered names, floating through town like curses. It didn't help that the Bobo case unfolded during the rise of social media true crime obsession. Facebook posts turned into digital wanted posters. Locals speculated publicly, sometimes naming their own neighbors their classmates, their kin. Imagine living in a place where every glance could mean, "Do you think it was him?" Some theories held weight. Maybe Holly had been stalked by someone who knew her routine, her early mornings, her quiet driveway, her brother still asleep. Maybe it was a crime of opportunity, a stranger who passed by and acted on impulse. Or maybe it was neither. Maybe it was someone from inside the fabric of Parsons itself. Investigators began circling men with reputations. Men with tempers, men with criminal records, men who looked too comfortable in camouflage. Among them were names that would later become infamous. Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and others tied together by methamphetamine, petty violence, and a simmering cruelty that seemed to flourish in cracks of small-town life. These weren't masterminds. These were men who lived sloppy, dangerous lives, and yet somehow orchestrated a disappearance so clean it baffled law enforcement. But here's the part that makes your skin crawl. The investigation was messy too. Evidence mishandled. Rumors treated as leads. Public statements contradicting private reports. For years, the case felt like it existed in two versions, what officials said and what locals whispered. And in between, the truth sat untouched. As theories stacked higher, Holly's image was plastered across Tennessee highways, on missing posters, in the corner of every news broadcast. She became less a person, more a question mark. And the longer went unsolved, the more distorted the theories became, half desperation, half paranoia, all fueled by the vacuum of real answers. For 3 years, the Bobo family lived in the purgatory of unanswered questions. And then, suddenly, everything cracked open. In 2014, investigators announced they had arrested a man named Zachary Adams. Not a stranger from out of town. Not a shadowy drifter. A local. Someone who had grown up in the same county. Breathed the same air. Haunted the same gravel roads. Adams wasn't alone in this web. Jason Autry, a man with a rap sheet longer than a deer rifle, was arrested soon after. Others' names surfaced. Dylan Adams, Zach's own brother. Among them, the accusations read like something out of a fever dream. Kidnapping, confinement, killing, disposal of the body. The kind of charges that suggest not a clean surgical abduction, but a chaotic, nightmarish spiral. And yet, almost immediately, the cracks showed. Witnesses changed their stories. Confessions were contested. The men themselves pointed fingers at each other in a carousel of blame. One day, Zach was a mastermind. The next, Autry was a ringleader. Then Dylan, timid and slow, was suddenly claiming knowledge he couldn't possibly have had. The truth seemed less like a straight line and more like a snake devouring its own tail. The real turning point came when a skull was found in 2014, hidden deep in the woods not far from where Holly had vanished. Hunters stumbled upon it. DNA confirmed it. Holly Bobo. After 3 years of absence, she was present again, but only as bones. It was proof, final and devastating, that she hadn't been alive all this time, and yet it raised more questions than it answered. The evidence was fragile. A shell casing near the remains, clothing fragments, but no smoking gun, no clear timeline. Prosecutors built their case on testimony from criminals, jailhouse informants, addicts, men whose credibility could evaporate in the courtroom under cross-examination. Still, the state pressed forward, determined to hold someone accountable, even if the picture they painted looked smeared and uneven. It was less like uncovering a conspiracy, and more like watching a circus. Deals struck behind closed doors, dramatic testimony delivered, and then undercut. Families staring across courtrooms with eyes hollowed by years of waiting. Every revelation felt like progress until it collapsed under scrutiny. This wasn't just a trial, it was a breakdown. A collapse of faith in systems, in neighbors, in truth itself. And in the center of it all, Holly's memory was pulled apart, weaponized, turned into exhibits and evidence bags. Justice, if it ever arrived, was already tarnished. In 2017, 6 years after Holly Bobo walked into the woods and never came back, the courtroom in Savannah, Tennessee, became the stage for an ending, or at least the closest thing to one this case could provide. Zachary Adams stood trial, accused of orchestrating her abduction, her torment, and her death. The prosecution painted him as a violent man spiraling under the grip of meth, a predator who saw Holly not as a person, but as prey. The jury heard testimony from Jason Autry, the kind of witness you don't trust even as you cling to his words, because they're all you have. Autry claimed he helped Adams move Holly's body, that he saw her fragile frame wrapped in blankets, that they dumped her remains in the woods as casually as if they were discarding garbage. He spoke of Adams with equal parts fear and familiarity, painting a picture of a man unhinged. But the evidence was thin, painfully thin. Forensic science had almost nothing to offer after years of exposure had reduced Holly's body to bones. No clear cause of death. No clean fingerprints. Just fragments. So the trial leaned heavily on testimony, on stories told by men whose own hands were filthy. Still, the jury believed enough. Adams was convicted of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and related charges. He received a sentence of life without parole plus 50 years. Dylan Adams, his brother, took a plea deal. Autry cut his own deal in exchange for cooperation. On paper, justice had been served. But in the air of that courtroom, the victory fell hollow. Too many contradictions lingered. Did the state actually prove beyond doubt what happened to Holly? Or did they simply tie the ugliest men in Parsons to the ugliest crime the town had ever seen and call it closure? Even the Bobo family, though grateful for a verdict, seemed to carry the weight of ambiguity. They had answers, but not the kind that heal. Holly's final hours remained blurred, stitched together from unreliable narrators. The official story feels like a patchwork quilt, full of gaps and guesses. And so, the case stands in this uneasy place, technically resolved, but spiritually unsettled. A conviction without clarity. Justice delivered, but truth still out in the woods somewhere, half buried with the rest of the evidence time swallowed. The aftermath of Holly Bobo's case settled over Parsons like a fog, that never fully burned off. Life in the small Tennessee town kept moving. Graduations, harvests, weddings. But the rhythm had changed. The idea that a young woman could be plucked from her driveway at dawn shattered the illusion of safety. Parents started locking doors they once left open. Neighbors began watching each other with suspicion instead of trust. Even the woods themselves seemed haunted, less like playgrounds and more like warning signs. For Holly's family, the trial wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another kind of sentence. They'd sat through years of speculation, through the grotesque theater of watching their daughter's name toss around in legal battles, through testimony that reduced her existence to exhibits and evidence. When the verdicts were read, they got the closest thing to closure that the justice system offers. But closure is a cruel word. What they received wasn't closure. It was survival. The case also reshaped Tennessee's legal landscape. Law enforcement took heat for missteps, the conflicting reports, the questionable handling of witnesses, the reliance on jailhouse snitches. Critics pointed to the investigation as a lesson in how not to handle a missing persons case. Training was overhauled, protocols adjusted. Holly's story became a case study for cadets and criminology students alike. Her tragedy transformed into a bullet point in law enforcement manuals. Nationally, the case fueled a wildfire of true crime fascination. Cable news plastered her face across screens, and the internet swarmed with theories. Holly became a symbol of vulnerability, of small-town fragility, of how darkness can sprout in places thought immune. For every family who saw her photo on a missing poster, the reminder was sharp. If it could happen in Parsons, it could happen anywhere. And still, her presence lingers. Memorial runs are held in her honor. Scholarships bear her name. Church choirs sing hymns with a little more ache because a voice is missing from their ranks. She is both absent and ever present, an echo stitched into the town's DNA. The legacy of Holly Bobo isn't just about crime or justice. It's about the rupture that occurs when innocence is torn away in daylight, when the line between neighbor and predator is erased. Parsons will never get its bubble back. Holly made sure of that, not by choice, but by the horror forced upon her. There's a line that keeps rattling around in my head. Daylight is supposed to be safe. It's a comforting lie we tell ourselves, that evil hides in shadows, that the dark is where monsters roam. But Holly Bobo vanished under the glare of the morning sun, in a driveway that had been her launch pad to school, to work, to life. The monster didn't wait for midnight. He didn't need it, and that's the part that sticks like a splinter. Safety isn't about locks or lights or alarms. Safety is an illusion, and once it cracks, it never fits back the same way. Parsons still wakes up to the same bird calls, the same humid air, the same camo-clad hunters trudging into the woods. But somewhere in the background, there's always that whisper, remember Holly. Remember that even at 7:45 in the morning, with neighbors nearby and family inside, the ground can still open up beneath you. The courts wrote their ending. The files are stamped, the guilty sentenced, the headlines archived, but the story doesn't feel finished. Too many contradictions. Too much reliance on men whose truths shift like oil on water. Maybe justice was served, or maybe a version of justice, the best the system could scrape together. Holly's last moments remain hidden, buried in a silence only she and her captors truly know. And yet there's this. Holly's name refuses to fade. It's spoken in classrooms when students study criminal procedure. It's etched into scholarships for aspiring nurses. It drifts across trails when volunteers gather for memorial runs. Her story is now a scar. Yes, but scars mean survival. They mean we've been marked, but not erased. If there's any reflection to hold on to, it's this brutal paradox. Monsters don't need to cover darkness, but memory doesn't need clarity to endure. Holly is gone, but she remains. In every locked door, in every nervous glance toward the woods, in every whispered prayer for the missing who haven't yet been found. Sometimes, the most haunting truths are the ones we'll never fully uncover. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next case.